Welcome back to the conversation in News Central Television. The first half of the program, we did look at the situation in Malawi, where the vice president has been charged with corruption. It's now time for us to switch gears and look at developments in South Africa, where supporters of South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, and South Africa's Communist Party staged a protest outside the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg over the weekend against the announced release of the killer of anti-apartheid activist Chris Hani, who was shot dead in 1993 by a 69-year-old Polish immigrant named Wallace, with links to the Afrikaner resistance movement. He was initially sentenced to death, but the death sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment after the abolition of the death penalty in South Africa. However, last week, the Constitutional Court announced the release of Janus Wallace, delivering his judgment at the Constitutional Court. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo said Wallace became eligible for parole in 2005, but his parole applications have consistently been denied.
Zondo said Justice Minister Ronald Lamola's decision in 2020 and the reasons given to deny Wallace parole were not satisfying, were contradictory, and in fact paved the way for his release. Wallace will be released within 10 days, starting from Monday, 21 November 2022. Presently, the South African Communist Party is calling on the Correctional Services Minister to defy the Constitutional Court. They want Ronald Lamola to delay Janus Wallace's release from prison. But the million-dollar question is, for how long will this be delayed? Now, joining us for this conversation, we have Sello Lediga, a political columnist. We also have Ongama Mtimka, a political analyst, joining us from Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Good evening. So I'll begin with you, Sello. You're going to take us down memory lane for a bit for our viewers and more understanding. Janus Wallace is known to be convicted for assassinating anti-apartheid leader Chris Hani. So tell us more about this and the masterminds behind this assassination and why this is such a controversial case in South Africa.
Yeah, it was the 10th of April, 1993, on a Saturday morning when Chris Hani was assassinated by Janus Wallace. And I must start by indicating that at the time, South Africa was involved in negotiations for a new democratic order and a new constitution. Undoubtedly, Chris Hani was the most popular political figure after Nelson Mandela. So after his assassination, there is no doubt that South Africa was totally on the brink of civil war. And it was Mandela stepping in, as a statesman that saved the situation. So it must be very clear that the people of South Africa felt the pain that most people will not understand, about the assassination of Chris Hani, a man who had actually laid down his arms to be able to be part of the negotiation process that was supposed to liberate this country. So people have never, it's almost 3 decades now, but obviously the family of Chris Hani will never welcome this kind of a decision. And the South African Communist Party, for which he was actually Secretary General, would not be able to do that as well. And the African National Congress, which is the ruling party, is one of the organizations that would have a difficulty with this kind of thing. But remember, when that happened, there was no democratic constitution. South Africa now has a democratic constitution that actually indicates what or what cannot be done. A lot of people who are on life have actually received parole, and no matter how difficult it is, you must accept that the ladies and gentlemen of the Constitutional Court have done their best to look at the law in a dispassionate manner and make sure that it is applied. For us as South Africans, it will be a difficult thing, but I think we must accept that things have changed, and no matter how hard it is important for people to respect the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa.
Thank you, Sello. I'd like to bring in Dr. Ongama Mtimka. Dr. Mtimka, the South African Communist Party is calling on the Correctional Services Minister to defy the Constitutional Court order. Sello did say when this took place, South Africa didn't have a democratic constitution, and that has changed. Now, they want Ronald Lamola to delay Yanis Wallace's release from prison. But how long can this delay happen, and what constitutional and legal means do they have to effect this delay?
So let me build from what my colleague has said. Chris Hani was a very charismatic leader. You had two groupings within the liberation fighters, those that had almost graduated from military activities and had gone on to work in the administrative side of the liberation struggle. And then those that continued to be commanders who, commanded great respect from those that they led, and in fact, became very popular as leaders. Now, if I can build from what my colleague said, the challenge here is not about the law that permits the granting of paroles to people who have committed heinous crimes. It's about the failure of the nation, or unreadiness of the nation, or in fact anger of the nation, to come to the realization that among these laws that have been created, the people who could benefit are also people who have claimed the lives of our heroes. So you asked the question about how long. So far, it's been 15 years since Yanis Wallace was eligible for parole, but could never be granted that parole by first the Mbeki administration and the Zuma administration and the Ramaphosa administration, precisely because it's a political hot potato to do so, especially given the fact that the South African Communist Party, of which Chris Hani was the Secretary General, has been in the tripartite alliance with the governing African National Congress throughout the history of the struggle for liberation and now. So their power, their pressure or potential, backlash from them has kept any of the leaders of the ANC that needed the support of the left from entertaining ideas about releasing Yanis Wallace, notwithstanding the fact that, like any other prisoner, he has now met the criteria for release. How long this is going to last is not going to be long at all, because South African politicians have become very much aware of the backlash that comes with disrespecting constitutional court rulings. South Africa is a constitutional democracy. It's not the kind of democracy where it is the power of the political elites, despite what the law says, that wins the day. It's going to be any act of refusing to give effect to the constitutional court ruling may result in an imprisonment if it is found that the minister or the commissioner is responsible for contempt of court.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mtimka. Now, I'd like to bring in Sello into all of this now. And looking at how sensitive the case is, I mean, the law is saying one thing, the people are still saying that that the man Wallace should still remain in jail. Now, when you look at the law, we have Section 51 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, Act 105 and 1997, which prescribes a minimum sentence for murder to 25 years, which he has clearly surpassed, which he also said. Now, still based on the sensitivity of this case, should different laws be applied on Wallace on the basis of who he killed rather than the crime he committed? I mean, can the quest for national peace be considered?
Look, I think we have to make a distinction between the law and politics. As my colleague Ongama has just indicated, in terms of the law, I can assure you, he will be released, and there's no way the minister can defy the constitutional court in South Africa. The difficulty is actually the politics. That when you release Yanis Wallace, where do you release him to? I do not see him surviving in the environment that exists, at the moment in South Africa. So what is needed now is basically political management. But his release, as far as I'm concerned, is inevitable, and I think we're left with a few days, Obviously, I know that in Poland, there's a huge reception that awaits him, and I'm not sure what the arrangements are between Justice, Home Affairs, and other, but I suspect that what will happen is that he will be released, sent straight to the airport, and he will have to go home to Poland, where he will be well received, And if that doesn't happen, I don't know how long he can really survive politically in South Africa, because I don't think he'll be able to move to anywhere else in this country. Chris Hani was such a charismatic and loved person that ordinary South Africans still feel the pain, So for as long for me, it's basically between law and politics. The law part is done. The South African Concord has never been defied. By the way, don't forget, it is this Concord that sent Jacob Zuma to prison when everybody else thought it was not possible. So as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing now is the political management. And I think if the South African government just takes out to Poland, I think with time, Johannes values will be forgotten. But for me, that is the real issue now, the political management of his release.
Thank you, Sello. Still talking political management. You did talk about the Zuma case, that the heavens didn't fall, but we saw the demonstrations that took place. We saw the wanton destruction of lives and property. Now, Dr. Mtimka, how large have these demonstrations been in South Africa, and do you fear that there might be a possibility of violence if it's released? And do you also agree with Sello that the best thing they might do is just to, from the correctional facility straight to the airport, next flight to Warsaw?
What I suspect, even though Chris Hani was loved, is that it takes a huge degree of mobilization in order to get people from anger to acts of violence. You may find that there may be some groups of either former combatants or aggrieved people with some military background who may want to, make some well-planned schemes to try and avenge Chris Hani's blood. But beyond elite groups, I don't see this becoming a mass mobilization issue as far as, the events that we saw during President Zuma's time. Part of why that is unlikely in this instance is that, unlike Chris Hani, President Zuma still commanded a relatively well-resourced grouping of entrepreneurs that benefited during his time, who would fund an initiative, who would fund the activities of last year, and in fact, carefully planning them. Unless maybe in this mode of conference politics of the ANC, this release of Walus is exploited by one of the groups within the ANC as an attempt to gain legitimacy. Otherwise, on its own, the risks would be for himself personally, but not necessarily nationally challenging events such as looting or instability of any kind. I don't think my colleague saw earlier, the department has said it's going to grant a permanent residency to Yalus Walus so that he can serve his sentence in South Africa. Now, I agree with my colleague that doesn't bode well for his personal safety because of the likelihood that elite groups, of trained people could attempt to avenge the blood of Chris Hani, not necessarily because of a mass-based action that can take place.
Yeah.
All right. I would like to bring in finally Sello into all this. While we're still looking at Wallo's, if being released, he stays in South Africa. But let's take a situation where he goes back to Poland, and there are speculations that he will be given a hero's welcome. I mean, if you look at the man, he's a man who has fought against the democratic struggles in South Africa. I mean, what signal does it give to South Africa and even neo-colonialists, all those fascists and the rest? What signal does it give the release of Janus Wallo's?
And also, to piggyback on what she said, are there any plans for reparations for the families of the victims? Because he did belong to the AWB group.
Yeah, well, look, I don't really see his future in the country, and I agree with Ongama that we are not looking at mass mobilization on the scale that we saw with Zuma. That's not possible because actually he has no support in this country, except even with a small right-wing organization in the country. It's not like it was.
Sello, can you hear us? Okay, so Dr. Mtimka, I think you have the final say on this. Are you with us?
Sorry, what were you asking him again?
Okay, we're looking at his reparation.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah, we're looking at, you said that he will have his parole in South Africa.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Earlier on, you mentioned his parole being in South Africa.
So the challenge.
Okay, just go on. If you can hear me, just go on, please.
The challenge here is that the victim-centered processes that are necessary for a parolee to be released have not necessarily reached a point where the widow of Chris Hani and her daughters are accepting that he should be released. So he is being released, Janus Wallo's is being released despite their anger. In fact, shortly after the Constitutional Court judgment, the widow of Chris Hani, Dimpoani, said that this judgment is diabolic and suggested that their feelings and the consequences, the negative consequences of losing their loved one, husband and father, were not taken into consideration in arriving at a decision. And in fact, she went to as far as quoting Lindiwe Sisulu, one of the contenders for the office of the president in the ANC conference, when she wrote a very provocative column early this year and asked South Africans, do we have justice? And she's one of the leaders. And so Dimpoane found comfort in her words and said that she had been vindicated by the passing of a judgment which in her eyes was not just at all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ongama Mtimka. We do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the conversation. I'd also like to thank Sello Lediga, political columnist. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out and sharing your insights with us here on the conversation. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is where we draw the curtains on today's conversation in the first half of the program. We did look at political developments in Malawi, where the vice president has been arrested and is currently facing charges in corruption. We just concluded our conversation on the release of Janus Wallo's, who killed anti-apartheid hero Chris Hani. Thank you very much for being a part of the conversation. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. See you next time on Wednesday.